structure and flexibility. The RP Diet app builds a structure of eating that creates the results you're looking for, but has the flexibility to let you scan your favorite foods and follow your preferred diet philosophy. The digital diet coach in your pocket is more powerful than ever, so let's build a better you with the RP Diet app.
And we are back. Thanks for joining us on the weekly webinar. We had the holidays this last couple of weeks, so sorry we didn't get one out to you a little bit sooner, but we are back, baby. Mike, how are we doing?
We are alive.
We are alive. That's
How
all
are
that
you?
counts. I'm good. Alive and ready to answer some silly-ass questions.
Cool. Let's get to it.
All right.
Ryan Agar. A man with 4 names, if you're counting.
I don't know how that happened, but whatever.
So he says, let us see what he says. Hey guys, in terms of making progress, whilst lifting and doing BJJ, is it best to do your training in blocks, focusing specifically on lifting in one block and BJJ in another, having the other maintenance volumes to make hypertrophy progress in the BJJ block? Could you put everything at maintenance other than 1 or 2 body part and MAV so you can progress and go in cycles? What would be the most optimal way to make as much hypertrophy gains as possible whilst making BJJ progress? I like both 50-50. That's a very important detail that I was going to ask. Thank God we got it, actually. And want to be pretty damn good at both. Love your content, guys. So I think that, Ryan, you should go watch the YouTube video that I made a while back called BJJ and Lifting. Actually, I don't know what it's called, but type in BJJ Lifting Weights Mike Israetel, and it'll pop up. It's very popular. It's an hour and 50 minutes, I believe, of super, super details about everything about how to design your periodization, as well as your weekly microcycle, your even daily timing of sessions, all that stuff. So that is the guide. But a real quick just grand tour is, so all training should be in blocks, period, right? And your jiu-jitsu and bodybuilding training for sure be in blocks. What I would say is, for the most part, you want to find a pretty good balance of good jiu-jitsu training and good bodybuilding training. And then most blocks should be a little bit north or south of that balance to emphasize one or another. So, for example, you might find that you can do 4 sessions a week of jiu-jitsu and 4 sessions a week of hard lifting, and that's kind of your total MRV. What we might have you do is when you're not competing in jiu-jitsu or competition's not coming up, and or jiu-jitsu progress is going super well and you feel like the training is really snappy, what you might want to do is do 5 sessions a week of lifting, and of course prioritize however you like. We'll talk about the MAV body part thing in a bit. And maybe 3 sessions of jiu-jitsu, so a little bit biased towards lifting. And then if you get a little bit bored of lifting, or for example a mass phase for hypertrophy ends, a cutting phase begins in which you actually don't have to train as much, or a maintenance phase begins, then you can flip the script and go to 3 sessions a week of lifting and go to 5 sessions a week, something like that, whatever's in your MRV, of jiu-jitsu. And you especially want to do that last flip, even more extreme one, in the month or 2 before you have a jiu-jitsu competition. At that case, you want to do 2 to 3 lifting sessions a week, as an example, and 4 to 6 jiu-jitsu sessions a week. And then after that, you retool after an active rest and go back the other way. But really, a lot of that alignment, which way you choose to go, is it more jiu-jitsu or more lifting, is so long as you're getting enough jiu-jitsu technique at work to get better, the next question is, what is your phase like in bodybuilding? Are you mass gaining? And is it the last mesocycle of a mass gain, right? So for example, if you're mass gaining and it's the first mesocycle, you could do a lot of jiu-jitsu, pretty even 50-50, and still get great results. But in your second and third, fourth meso of massing, you need more and more lifting. And doing more jiu-jitsu during massing is fucking ass backwards, because you get worse at jiu-jitsu gas-wise. And also you don't put in enough volume to hypertrophy training, and thus your massing is really just gaining weight while shooting yourself in the foot. So, as your massing progresses, you do more lifting and less BJJ by a little bit. I think that's really cool. During maintenance phases, 1 to 2 months for hypertrophy, you could do much more jiu-jitsu and much less hypertrophy. And actually, if jiu-jitsu is really important to you, during those times, you might do 2 or 3 maintenance phases. And James when we loose the hounds for you, correct me if I'm wrong in that sort of thing, but maybe 2 or 3 mesocycles instead of 1 or 2 at maintenance, and just lift at maintenance volume, 2 to 3 sessions a week. And then much more jujitsu. That'll really bump your jujitsu game, but of course it'll give you some aches and pains, and a little bit of jujitsu is going to kind of get stale. And then once you start cutting, you can sort of figure out a roughly even jujitsu and bodybuilding split. And maybe even again, as the cut gets deeper and deeper, you do a little bit less jiu-jitsu and a little bit more hypertrophy training, relatively speaking. And that's how I would set up the cycles, barring, of course, competition in jiu-jitsu, which changes everything to be, a little bit more jiu-jitsu, a little bit less lifting as the competition approaches. James?
Yeah, those are all really good. So I don't disagree with Mike on any of those points, but I'm just going to go a different direction than Mike did. And that's more of a simple one in that if you're kind of 50-50, like in terms of your body composition goals and your jiu-jitsu goals, I think that's a reasonable assumption then, is that you are not trying to be the best at either one of them. So I think an alternative idea might be pick as many jiu-jitsu sessions per week as you feel really positive about. And I say that because unless you're doing private lessons, most jiu-jitsu is structured around class schedule. So I would say pick the number of classes that you go to where you feel like you're making good progress and you're satisfied, and then adjust your lifting, which is going to be much more flexible in terms of how much you want to go to the gym, basically, around that, and just change the frequency on days per week of training to something that's very manageable. And right there is kind of like your base sustainable pattern that you can just always default back to throughout the year. So if you find that doing jiu-jitsu twice a week, you just don't make enough progress and you feel kind of stagnant, go up to 3, right? And if you feel like 3 is a pretty good spot, you might have to adjust your weight training volume. So if you were doing like 2 days of jiu-jitsu, 5 days of lifting, and you up it to 3, you might have to go lifting down to 4, but that might be a very, very sustainable spot for you, right? And so if you start taking one or the other more seriously, then you can do all those things that Mike already described. But since it sounds like you're just doing it for fun and for recreation and for feeling good, I would say find the class schedule where you feel like you're making good progress and you feel good about your jiu-jitsu sport game, and then adjust your lifting around that, because it's much more malleable and much easier in terms of scheduling.
Yep. Lastly, the 1 or 2 body parts at MAV so you can progress and go in cycles. So this is a very, very common question. We answered a bunch on RP Plus, but not much on YouTube. So this is, I think, one of the first YouTube tastes of this question being answered, is you have a certain total systemic sum of all MRVs, and then you have all the sums of the individual local MRVs for muscles. And for intermediates, the sum of the locals start to get bigger than the systemic. So the answer is you have to trim as many body parts to MEV or MV as needed to get the sum of the locals into the systemic. And how many of those is entirely up to what the individual MRVs is of your local, what your systemic MRV is, and how those two relate to each other. So for example, someone who is a relatively slow twitch individual and not super duper strong, maybe hasn't been training for a whole lot of time, can do everything, every single body part from MEV to MRV and never hit their systemic MRV. But unless they go to MRV for local body parts, like week to week to week to week, and then you just get local degradation to performance, they might not even ever get to systemic degradation. But for somebody more advanced, they might be like, okay, I can push, like back, chest, and quads hard in one meso, but I can't also do like shoulders and glutes and hams hard that meso too. Like I could do like 4 or 5 hard body parts, but not 8, right? And then somebody else could be like, I can do 2 or 3 body parts hard, especially if they're the big ones, but not all 8. That would be crazy, right? You basically just do as many as you can and still hit local MRVs, not systemic MRVs for most of them in every meso. If you start getting into a situation that training the usual number of muscle groups that you do, and of course the big ones count for more than the little ones. You can always fit in, or nearly always, calves and forearms and stuff like that, but fitting in legs is a bit of a tough call. So put the big body parts in there first, the big muscle groups, the ones you want to train. How many more of them you want to train on top of that is really you watch your performance. If you start getting systemic reductions in performance towards the end of your mesocycles, when you're trying to include a certain number of muscle groups, then and you're not hitting local MRVs, then you getting into a situation where you probably need to reduce the amount of muscle groups you're putting on the front burner, so to speak. So put more of them on maintenance, 1 or 2 more, and keep the rest on MAV or MEV to MRV, and then you'll be good to go. And how do you tell if it's central limiting or systemic limit versus local? Well, a local limit means you're probably going to have a lot of beginning to have a lot of overlapping soreness, and you feel fundamentally okay, but your like local musculature just feels like it's total dog shit, and your performance really radically declines. And you can have some lifts that are going super well, some muscle groups, and some muscle groups that are going not so well at all. And that means the super well ones are probably not MRE, and the ones that are not going super well at all probably are very close. On the other hand, systemic limit is when you usually actively feel very bad. Your desire to train is going to fall off. Your sleep quality and quantity might fall off. Your appetite might fall off. Your sex drive might do weird things. You know, psychologically, you might feel sort of like vulnerable or sort of unable to cope with the realities of the world. Like instead of coming into a leg workout, looking at the sheet you have to do and being like, yes, fucking let's burn this shit. You can look at it and be like, ugh. Like, you know how you get 6 weeks into a leg mesocycle, you just look at the volume and you're like, I'm going to die. There's no way I'm going to do this, right? That stuff coupled with the fact that none of your muscle groups are doing well anymore. Like everything's in the shitter at the same time because it's a systemic effect. If it's more of that, and you're barely getting any pumps or any soreness in your muscles because you're too tired to train them. Like imagine training biceps after 10 sets of deadlifts. It doesn't matter how not locally fatigued your biceps are. You're not going to hit remotely close numbers. And it's not going to be like your muscles are fried and something's fucked up. It's like you're going to have trouble activating them, right, to their fullest ability. So if that's the case, you're probably doing too much overall volume and you need to take fewer muscle groups off of the priority list. But if all the muscle groups are getting torched and you're performing super fine in general and there's no systemic effects, then you don't need to prioritize because you probably won't really benefit from it. James?
Yeah. So while I was listening to you talk about that, I kind of was having this kind of epiphany where, so if you are doing both of these things, right, you really don't have to be playing around with the systemic versus local considerations so much throughout most of the year, because the only time that's really going to be a big deal is when you're massing, right? When you're cutting, you're basically going to be trying to maintain everything that you already have while doing BJJ, right? So essentially, you're going to get a little bit of everything. It's going to be very symmetrical training for the most part. Mostly the same answer with maintenance. The only time that differs is when you are trying to do certain body part emphases during mass phase, right? And so here's my kind of take on that. I don't disagree with Mike in any way, but I think for the average person, making a lot of these kind of calculations is needlessly tedious, right? With what's the bottom line? Well, the bottom line is when you're on mass phase, your jiu-jitsu volume should essentially go down to maintenance volume so that you can actually mass properly. Otherwise, Mike said this earlier, you're just going to be spinning your wheels and getting fat, right? So at that point, if your jiu-jitsu training is interfering with your mass phase, you have to be wondering, like, what am I actually doing at this point? I should probably be considering taking my jiu-jitsu volume all the way down to maintenance volume and just doing a proper mass. Trying to do like a 50-50 mass is doable, but I think is probably just not a good use of your time, nor is like trying to weigh out the systemic versus local implications of the training when you're trying to balance the two different sports. Does that make sense? I feel like that's for an average person, that's needlessly tedious. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And it's also going to be like, it's just going to be pretty apparent. So what I tell people is like, look, just train your whole body, MEV to MRV. It'll be pretty obvious when the shit doesn't add up anymore, because you're going to be like, look, man, I used to train my triceps with 20 sets. Now I'm training with 10, and I'm super beat up at the end of week 4. Everything's fucked up. I feel like total shit. Like, man, that just sort of sounds like systemic. Why don't you try taking out a couple muscle groups and seeing if you can do it? They take out a couple to put them to maintenance volume, and they're like, oh my God, I just had the greatest cycle ever. Like, well, that sounds like you're systemic. Sounds like you've got 6 average muscle groups out of 8 that you could train, that you can train. Just train 6 for the next however long you can at MEV and MRV until that becomes a problem, if it ever does, and then reassess. Yeah, it's something that's pretty obvious if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
All right, Aiden says, hi, Mike and James. Now that I've nearly completed Meso 1 of my mass, I am now needing to up the frequency in all upper body movements to 4 times a week instead of 3, while still keeping my lower body at 3 times a week. My split currently is 3 upper-lower sessions, 6 days a week, 3 upper and 3 lower. Day 1 chest focus, day 2 quad focus, day 3 back focus, day 4 ham focus, day 5 shoulder focus, day 6 glute focused. Do you have any tips on how to organize my next meso with these new frequencies? Should I arrange it to have full body, 6 full body days, or should I keep the arrangement I currently have, but instead add on the upper body movements to each of the new lower body days? So a couple things. I think if you want to go do some reading, sort of Eric Helms has been writing a lot about this recently. Splits are a little bit, they're cool to think about, but honestly, the way you design programming is to treat each muscle relatively individually and dose it accordingly. And there's going to be interaction effects, but those aren't super terribly difficult to account for and often can be accounted for by exercise selection. Like if you have to train back on the same day as legs and a leg workout really beats up your lower back, you can switch those back movements on that day to movements like more cable machine, et cetera, or more vertical pulling and less horizontal rowing and stuff. So with adjustments like that, you basically pepper in everything you need and it sort of falls into a structure that is going to be effective. And a part of that structure is, getting the frequencies you need. Another part is making sure to space out to the frequencies, the actual sessions per muscle group relatively well. So you don't have like chest Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then the rest of the week's no chest. You might want to move it around so that it's, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or something like that, right? And then how that falls out can be pretty wonky. And then the last thing I'll say, and I think James might have more to say on this, is, you might not need to up the frequency on all upper body movements. If you have like a really good program that's really suiting you well, you might not need to radically change everything. And what you might want to do is just, pepper in a little bit more upper body volume on each one of the 3 days, and it largely accomplishes the same thing. So I think, the 3 time a week thing, if you have an elegant plan to move from 3 times to 4 times a week, I think it's good. And if you have the bandwidth, it's great. But sometimes it'll fuck your shit up so much that the program you write is either going to be technically valid but looks weird, which is cool. That's recommendation number 1. Or you might not even have to fuck with it, and you might not have to go to 4 days a week. And that's kind of
Yeah.
there, James.
So I think what Mike was spot on that. So if you have a 3 times frequency that's largely working for you, the goal is not necessarily to increase it to 4 times frequency, right? The goal is to like have some frequency periodization throughout the year and find things that work well. The problem that you run into now is going from 3 to 4 on virtually everything. There's going to have such there's going to be so much entropy from adding so much frequency that it's going to be very hard to tell if what you're doing is working, because there could be problems from a variety of different muscle groups on a variety of different days, right? So I think what's probably a really good idea, and Mike was kind of already hinting at this, is you have a good 3 times program now. Maybe only increase up to 4 times on a couple, maybe 1 or 2 muscles, and just see how it goes, right? I think that is going to be very, very sustainable. And if anything goes wrong, you'll be able to look back and say like, okay, here's kind of where I made a change, and here's where things started to get fucked up, right? When you have every muscle that goes up to 4 times a week, you're going to have so much overlap and so much systemic spillover on a lot of different days. It's going to be hard to figure out where those problems are for you. So I think a good idea would be pick maybe 1 or 2 muscle groups, especially the easy ones like arms or shoulders or something like that, and go up to 4 times and just see how that worked. And then you can make a note like, okay, this worked totally fine last time I did this. I can actually build on this the next time I go up to this frequency periodization scheme, right? Instead of just trying to go like all or nothing. So that's what I would do. And I think like what Mike said before also about treating each muscle group kind of as its own thing is really, really important when you're making these super, super crazy individualization type changes, right? So there's not like a template that we can give you for 4 times frequency program, just because everybody's going to be so different. It's hard to just kind of clump it into easy to follow templates. So I would say just try a couple, see how it goes, and then keep doing that over the course of the next several blocks, years, et cetera, and just keep making improvements as you go.
Boom. Metal Paul says, hey docs, hope you're both good. Just a single question on the best way forward this time. I looked down and it's not a single question.
I think he posted last week and then this week also.
Yeah. Ever since a strength block, I got a nagging shoulder. I think it's from heavy overhead pressing, but not sure. From playing around with exercise selection, I've been able to train around it. My last 3-month fat loss blocks are all good so far. I'm in my deload now. I was planning on doing a 3-week resensitization block for a total of 4 weeks on maintenance, and then to kick some ass and extend a mass block. However, the shoulder is still nagging. Quite a bit less than before, but still there. I was wondering if doing a 1 or even 2-week active rest might be better in this situation, or even 1 to 2 weeks off, totally off training. Thanks, Paul. Paul, I don't think that's necessary because your shoulder is only involved in certain things. And if you literally pick movements which do not involve it at all, which might mean that for several weeks you don't train any pushing in your upper body or something like that, that's okay. But you don't need to take the rest of your leg. You're doing squats or whatever, as long as it doesn't hurt your shoulder, leg presses or calf raises or hamstring curls. That's not going to do anything to your shoulder. And not doing them is barely going to increase the recovery rate of your shoulder. So I would say is pick movements that literally just don't hurt it at all. Forget overhead pressing exists. And then 6 months later, after the memory of pain is gone, go back to it. You'll probably, I've done that to dozens of muscle groups and joints over the years. It works really well. Where I fuck myself is like as soon as it starts to feel a little better, I get back into it. Or I try to change my whole program to accommodate this bullshit. Shit is going to happen to you. It's going to happen to your knee. It's going to happen to your hip. It's going to happen your whole career. Use whatever exercises that still work the area. Do not hurt it at all. And if none exist, then it's time for you to stop training that area at all, right, for a while. And then as soon as that runs its course, then you're back and slowly ease in to more and more and more. And it's like it's never happened. I've recovered from, dozens of injuries doing exactly that, and not recovered from dozens of others doing not exactly that, James.
Yeah, so just to reiterate what Mike was saying, there's no incentive to do active rest or off training in this case if the goal is just to kind of make sure your shoulder is still healing. Really, the issue is just doing things that don't irritate it at this point. And whether you do, like a resensitization style training or you take active rest, like as long as that is being accommodated, like you're just not doing things that, or you're doing things that don't irritate your shoulder, that's the bigger issue here. So there's no incentive for you to do those things. 1 to 2 weeks off of training might be good in the sense that you're not going to have any indirect work that's affecting your shoulder, even if it's minimal. But I would say there's no strong case for somebody to say like, oh, you should just take off for 2 weeks at this point. Just keep doing kind of maintenance volume style training, and hopefully it'll get back, and just take overhead pressing and throw it in the garbage for now. I don't want to say that it was definitely overhead pressing, but what I will tell you is that in my experience, overhead pressing tends to either give people issues or exacerbate previous issues with the shoulders. So and I've actually had a couple clients recently email me saying, why don't we do any overhead pressing work? It seems so odd. And I give them that exact reason. It's not a good fatigue fitness payout in terms of hypertrophy training.
Yeah, the overhead press is fucking stupid for hypertrophy training, and this is coming from yours truly with what I've been told is one of the greatest overhead presses on earth, apparently.
I think I know a certain strongman who might disagree with that.
For sure. I guess relative to my weight, I did do something in overhead pressing that's kind of nonsense, but it's a fun exercise for me, and I really like it because I'm really good at it. But I got to be honest, boy, did I learn a lot about systemic fatigue and axial fatigue by overhead pressing, especially standing. Holy fuck. It's a whole different world. And then I started doing seated, and I was like, this is so much better for everything. Just as good for the shoulders and triceps, except doesn't fuck me up nearly as much. And then recently I've just been not doing it at all, and I've had the best development of my triceps and chest I've had ever. So there you go. Front delts are never a problem for 99% of the time. So
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next question from Metal Paul is, I've been got some questions on MPT and how to set up an upcoming block this time. I've been tampering with the standard male physique template based on your answers in the webinar, and it all worked out awesome.
Great.
Number one, first, I was wondering what the major differences between the novice intermediate and the advanced templates. When I bought the MPT, I was suggested to buy the immediate one, but on my current numbers, it would be the advanced one. Is it just the mesos are a bit shorter? Instead of 6-to-1, they made a unit 5-to-1 shorter than the advanced? I think so. One of the things also is the advanced ones have a bit more pulsatility of the muscle groups. That is basically have a slightly lower training frequency per muscle group, and there's more distinct times of rest because advanced athletes tend to mess themselves up a lot, and they need a little bit more rest between training, whereas intermediates and beginners, generally speaking, can train legs like back-to-back or every other day and be totally fine, whereas advanced, because they're stronger, because they're bigger, because their joints take more of a toll, because they have a better mind-muscle connection, and the technique is better, they can just provide more overload, straightforward, more stimulus, and also that brings more fatigue, so it's got to have a bit more of a judicious, more of an attention to the SRA principle, in other words. So not a huge difference, but something that you would notice in your training.
And to be honest, Paul, I think if you're thinking about like, oh, should I be getting the advanced template? The fact that you're individualizing the template for yourself and it's already working well means like you don't even need to bother doing that. Like you have one, you've already applied like advanced individualization strategies. Don't even think about the advanced template.
Yeah. Number two, due to an unexpected family outing, I'll be away in the 5th week of my upcoming 6-to-1 meso. I was thinking of solving this by doing a 5-to-1 meso, depending on your answer to the previous question, and by cutting My current resensitization meso week short, which will land the family outing right in deload week. I am just in doubt about cutting the resensitization short. Will 1 week of deload for my previous 3-month fat loss block, 1 week of low volume, but our training then 1 week of another deload be enough to set me up for a productive long-term mass block? Maybe, maybe not. I would say what I would do is not cut your resensitization week short or phase short. Keep it the same, and then just do a 4-to-1 paradigm. And then after 4-to-1, you'll be back from that family outing like a fucking bat out of hell, and you can do like a 6-to-1 or something like that. What I have found is that when my accumulation to deload ratio is a little bit less than I thought it was going to be, I just have excellent training. When it's a little more than I thought it would be, I have dog shit training. So
big surprise, right?
Yeah, there's no bonus points. That's the thing, that there's no bonus points for going 7, 8, 9 weeks. You know, like what if I told you could train that many weeks without deloading? I would take it and I would just leave it. You know, like if a genie came out of a bottle and said you could train for 9 weeks without needing a deload, I'd be like, you know, that the last 3 weeks are fucking garbage anyway. So I would say that just do a fucking awesome gnarly 4-to-1. That last week in the 4-to-1, fry yourself, and you'll be fucking golden, man. You'll make excellent gains.
I think that's a really good answer. And I also think too, like there's not a huge, just on that last note that you had, I thought that was an interesting point. I think there's kind of this like idea that you should try and strive to make your mesos as long as humanly possible, right? For no reason other than more length is better, right? I think that what's kind of just worth noting is it's definitely worth seeking out strategies if you are kind of stuck in a 2-to-1 to 3-to-1 paradigm.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing.
Okay, perfect. We're on the same wavelength. But once you get to like the 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 6-to-1, like it's probably mostly a wash. Really what we just don't want to see is like you spending 25% of the year doing fatigue management, right? After that, you're pretty much good to go with whichever one you find.
Yep, and direct research after that says that you basically don't lose any muscle when you're deloading for a week, and any muscle you do lose comes back instantly. And the repriming, the resensitization effect, which Cody Hahn actually had a podcast with Steve Hall on, which was excellent. The evidence for that is mounting and has already been around for a while. But the resensitization effect is so big that it, at the very least, makes up completely for the deload in charitably a 3-to-1, and possibly even worse paradigm. So if you're doing 4-to-1s, and you're like, I got to get to 5-to-1, you're literally climbing a rope that's going nowhere. If you are doing 2-to-1s, yeah, you got some shit to think about. If you're doing 3-to-1s, you probably could do a little tiny bit better with 4-to-1, but I wouldn't even put my professional reputation on that statement. I would say that's a decent guess. So 4-to-1, anything from 3-to-1 to 5-to-1 is golden. Honestly, I think unless you're a beginner, if you can pull off a 6-to-1 or more regularly, you might not be training hard enough in any one of those, especially in the beginning.
Right. So that's the mistake I think people make, was they think that longer is inherently better. So they start so conservatively that what they're doing is essentially like active rest for a couple weeks. And then they're hitting, at week 3, they're hitting their actual accumulation phase, right? And that's the problem.
That's a lot of downtime. All right, number 3, the updated guides on Hypertrophy Hub are great, but the way to set up your mesos got me a bit confused. I'm currently doing all the rep ranges into each meso, but emphasizing the 5 to 10 range in meso 1, 10 to 20 in meso 2, 20 to 30 in meso 3. However, I'm doing that differs from the guide. I've been changing exercises, so the number of exercises stays the same across all mesos. I just changed different ranges of the exercises and how I prioritize where to add volume. As an example, back focus day in meso 1 would consist of 2 exercises in the 5 to 10 range and 1 in the 10 to 20 range. Meso 2 would be 1 in the 5 to 10 and 2 in the 10 to 20. The new guides on the Hypertrophy Hub, however, add exercises, making the mesos increase in the number of exercises you do for each muscle group. In that system, you not only add volume by number of sets within meso, but also add volume across mesos by adding exercises themselves. Yes, that's because they add frequency. Right? So that's the missing piece there. Should I change my MPT even more to incorporate the system too? Good luck. I don't think that Microsoft Excel is you can manually re-engineer it every single meso. So what we do in the hypertrophy guides is to give you the optimal. And a lot of times optimal training is needlessly complex. It is something like myself, Charlie, and Jared do because we have no day job. If a pro bodybuilder asked how to train, I would say exactly like this. And if you're not a pro bodybuilder, you can get 99%, 95% of the benefit by not doing any crazy shit like that. I think the way you're doing it is fucking totally great. Just make sure that you're doing enough volume to hit everything you need between MBV and MRV. How you get to that volume, whether it's introducing new exercises, which has its advantages and disadvantages, or just doing more sets of older exercises is a bit much more of a nuanced and individual point. The big thing, and I don't know, we'll see what James thinks about this, the big reason that we introduce, and this is coming up in the book that we're going to be publishing this year, and it's in the guides already, well, the big reason we introduce new exercises as the mesos progress is the question of, if you want to add more volume, how can you do it best in an increasingly more fatigue constrained environment? Like as you go block, meso to meso, meso to block, the fatigue goes up. The joint fatigue especially goes up, connective tissue. So when someone says, I do an average of 5 sets of squats in meso 1, or sorry, 5 sets of quads, we could say, look, you could low bar squat for 5 sets and be fine. In meso 2, maybe you should switch to high bar and a bit of front squat. But look, we added 2 exercises, right? Took one away. And then in the last meso, maybe you have to do some total of 25 sets of quads. Man, I'm probably going to throw in some leg extensions and leg presses in that mug, because holy fuck, 25 sets of high bar squats and front squats will kill you. So it's one of those, like, what is sustainable to add? There's no magic in the addition. It's not even much for variation. Variation occurs on a completely different time scale entirely. Like that's multiple mesos, and then you delete and replace based on responses. The addition of new exercises as the block progresses meso to meso to meso is really just a way of adding volume by choosing exercises that are not as systemically and connective tissue fatiguing. It doesn't even mean they're the best ones. Like I don't want to add pull downs, I want to add pull-ups, but if I add any more pull-ups, my shoulder is going to dislocate from my fucking body. So I go for the next worst thing and add pull downs because it's sustainable. It keeps me plugging along, keeps me getting good gains. And then I have to recycle at the end anyway and go back to basics. James?
Yeah, all excellent. And one thing, Paul, just to keep in mind, the reason why the hypertrophy guides are different from the templates is simply because of time. And one of the things that has happened more recently is we've changed some of our opinions based on the evidence about like how much volume per muscle group per session we're going to use, and what just some evidence, but more anecdote, I think, on how many like sets per muscle group or sets per exercise for any given muscle group is reasonable. And that's why you see some of those exercises and frequency related changes in the hypertrophy guides that are not always manifested in some of the templates. So we have changed some of our thoughts on that based on more recent evidence, and that's just a factor of time. That's all. Nothing crazy.
Yep. All right. Yordan Sanyev. Which is a fucking sweet name. I would bet he's like from Bulgaria or some shit like that. Yordan, you let us know. He says, hey guys, 2 questions for you. One annoying and one fun. JK, both are annoying.
No!
Number 1, how worried should I be? Very worried. I'll answer this. And the Jewish answer is very worried. If you have to ask, you're not worried enough.
Be afraid of everything.
Be afraid of things. How worried should I be about performance drop-off as I progress through sets in an exercise, and how should I correct for it? The way I understand it is a performance scale applies to all sets, and I rate it on average when trying to figure out if I should add sets to the next session. Cool, right? Well, so actually, the performance metric does apply to all sets, but if you're asking yourself the question of, okay, in this week, did I perform at or above what I did last week? You only compare relevant sets. So like the first 4 sets last week, I only did 4. This week I did 5. But you don't compare the 5th set to this week to last week because you got dick to compare it to. So you get the first 4 sets for both weeks. And then the next week after, you might have 6 sets to compare, but if you want to compare all 3 weeks, you have to just do 4, 4, and 4. That's one way of doing it. Another way is just top set, the first set. First set, if your first set fundamentally at the reps you needed or above, you're performing, right? Otherwise, there's no way to hit that. Now, that has a little bit more of a randomness. Some people don't get their best reps on top sets. Sometimes you get one great top set and then you piss your pants so much on that one that all the other ones go down like crazy, and it turns out that top set was really just an emotional fluke and you really are above your MRV, right? So we do recommend comparing multiple sets to multiple sets, but only the relevant ones. Here's the cool kicker. As you go through and do more and more sets, the performance drops off more and more. But if you only compare relevant sets, you get roughly the same amount of roughly the same amount of accumulated fatigue within each program as you compare the sets. Another cool thing is you could say, okay, what if I have 2 exercises for a muscle group? Like let's say I have squats and then leg presses, right? If I do like 3 sets of squats in this day and 3 sets of leg presses in this day, the next session, so let's say 2 sessions down, I'm doing 5 and 5. It doesn't fucking matter how well my squats go on the 5 session one or on the 5 set session that's 2 weeks away. After 5 total sets of squats, my leg presses are gonna have to take a hit. Like there's no way I'm gonna be performing as well. So what you can do is for each muscle group, maybe the best way to measure MRV or performance is taking the first exercise of each session for that muscle group, because all the other ones are going to be a bit sort of soaked with fatigue, and it's kind of tough to tell what is intra-session fatigue and what is cumulative fatigue, which is really what we want to know, right? But as long as you're resting according to a reasonable rubric, like we present in the muscle hypertrophy guides, or a set time rest, as long as you're not resting like 1 minute some days and 5 minutes other days, set to set comparisons on a first muscle group, first exercise, train for every muscle group every week, do a really, really good job. James?
Yeah, and so I was just going to kind of comment on that too. It is good to use all of the comparable sets, and it is good to also look at the averages. But one of the things that you can run into if you're looking at performance averages is there are some like subtle nuances that could kind of fall through the cracks. The easiest example being you might have like 4 sets, and you're comparing the comparable sets from week to week, and you notice that the average is pretty close on those, but one of the sets on the second time that you did it, is like in the toilet. And that would be something that would be easy to overlook, where you did the first time you did it, it was okay. And then the second week you did it, you actually started to see performance drops towards the end, which might be kind of hinting like you should probably cap off that particular session at 3 sets, maybe see how that goes, something like that. But for the most part, yeah, I had another point, but I also forgot it as I was rambling there.
Let me hit this other point real quick, and maybe you can remember. His second part of the question is one way to auto-regulate during the session better than the other? Do I keep the same weight and lower reps as performance drops off, or do I lower the weight and keep the reps the same? Does it matter much? It does matter much. A real simple way to look at it is you have your loading targets, like what percent of your 1 rep max a certain exercise is supposed to be. As long as you keep the weight the same, it still hits the loading target. The reps take care of themselves. But the rule on that is that if something goes below 5 reps per set, then it's just not enough hypertrophy for you to bother doing a set, so you should probably lower the weight. But in most cases, if you start something at like 15 reps or 10 reps, it's not going to drop below 5 unless you're doing like 8 sets of it. Why the fuck would you do that for a single exercise? So usually it's a self-solving problem if you do the cap. Or as long as it's not below 5 reps, you're good to go. Then let the sets drop as they will. If you do have a set rep range, which you could have for a variety of reasons, then you just have to say, if I'm going to let the reps drop until they drop out of my rep range that I want, and then I'm going
That's
to
where I was
adjust the load.
going to, yeah, that's where I was going to. Shit.
And it doesn't matter much. So to say it doesn't matter much, it doesn't. As long as you're getting high quality training, which means you're getting lots of great stimulus to fatigue ratio reps per set, and you're getting good mind muscle connection, like good technique. If you're at a point where like I'm doing sets of 2 in bent rows, you're not getting any of that. That's shit. That's total awful bullshit. And on the other hand, if you're like, okay, I did sets of 8 on my bent row instead of like I did 9 before, and now I'm doing 8. Like, what does that mean? Like set to set. And someone's like, oh, are you still getting a great set with 8 reps? You're like, oh my God, totally. I could get a great set of 6. And be like, well, then don't fucking worry about it. Just do 8, do 7. That's totally fine. You only have to change it when it drops below a certain relatively objective cutoff, which we think 5 reps is pretty close to that sort of answer.
Yeah, and going back to the rep ranges, Mike and I have been advocates for, just having goal rep ranges, not necessarily as a hard cutoff, but as a soft cutoff almost always. And that is also a really good indicator of maybe it's time to start using more exercises in your session, right? So you might be like, okay, I have like 10 sets of chest or whatever that I got to get through today, and around 6 sets of bench press, like the 5th and 6th sets really start to drop off in performance. Should I be concerned about that, or how should I correct that? Well, maybe you just don't need to be doing more than 4 sets of bench press. Maybe it might be time to consider using another chest movement in that same session. Yeah. And that would be a way that you could fix something like that.
And the important part of that isn't that your performance is down, because as long as it's above 5 reps, you're still fundamentally good on the performance. The question you have to ask yourself is, am I still getting quality stimulus out of these sets? Like, if nothing short of 8 reps gets you a pump and you can't even feel the muscle, if you're so tired that it just feels like you're accomplishing work, man, probably don't drop below 8 reps. But if you're dropping all the way to 6 reps on incline barbell press, and each one of those reps is fucking you in the ass, it's fucking golden, let it drop, no big deal. It's just when the technique isn't right, the mind-muscle connection isn't right, the pump isn't what you're looking for, and so on and so forth. Sometimes you even have trouble targeting the right kind of muscles. James, you ever notice like if you have a sufficiently light weight on flies, you can really feel your chest. But if you go too heavy, you start just more or less feeling your shoulder joint, and you're like, I don't even know what I'm doing here anymore. Like that. That's totally a thing. So pay attention to that kind of stuff and make sure the quantity is above a certain threshold, like 5 reps or whatever your rep range is, and the quality is there. And use the quality to adjust the quantity if needed. But if the quality is golden, you don't need to adjust shit. Just keep doing more sets as needed.
And so just to kind of reiterate, so like we usually have that like 6 reps is kind of like the hard cutoff for anything, but you can still benefit from using the soft cutoff where you say like, okay, I'm using this particular movement in this session and it's meant to be in the 10 to 20 rep range, right? And once my sets really start going below 10, that might be a soft cutoff for yourself where you say like, either I need to do something else or I'm maybe just about done on this particular thing for today.
Yep.
And that
or
tends
I can drop the weight on it.
Right, or you can use downsets or something like that, and that actually tends to work really well. Just anecdotally. So you don't have to use like if you say like okay 10 to 20 or whatever. You don't have to say like 10 is a hard cutoff, but it's probably a good soft cutoff where you should consider doing something else.
Yeah. All right. Number 2. Somebody asked Luke Thomas on his live chat, how does Kamaru Usman, a power athlete, have such tremendous cardio? Luke Thomas said to ask you guys. So basically, how does someone train to be jacked and have great cardio at the same time? You can thank or curse Luke for that one. So I'll give you a really quick overview, and then James will pick up the pieces because this is really a specialty area. So the number one requirement to be Kamaru Usman is to be Nigerian. And the Nigerians are very, very special people. Everything you think you're good at, there's a Nigerian better. And probably better at everything that you do, including shit you can't do. Like, there's got to be like a Nigerian world weightlifting champion rocket scientist somewhere. And by that, I mean, there's like 100,000 of these fuckers.
And so, who is also a GQ model.
Yeah, it's just like nonsense, right? So first of all, don't compare yourself to Nigerians. That's a bad start to begin with. And I do actually have a point. Other than a racial supremacy theory favoring Nigerians, there is a point, which is Nigerian or not, some people just have fucking unbelievable genetics. And you look at Kamaru Usman and you say, man, he must be training to get jacked. I'm not even so sure he does that. I don't know if he does hypertrophy training. I would suspect he doesn't. There are folks at my gym at Balance Studios who are incredibly talented, not at Usman's level, but up there, and they're pro fighters, and they straight up don't lift weights until it's camp, and then they lift weights 2 or 3 times a week during camp, which is for like 8 weeks out of the fucking year. It's insane. And they're fucking jacked and super strong, and they give me all kinds of problems in jiu-jitsu. So like, how the fuck I'm spending all these goddamn years of every year training with weights, and these guys are almost as strong as me. It's insane. Genetics go a really, really long way. So what you must have in order to be an unbelievable power athlete, we'll leave jacked alone because jacked is genetics, and have great cardio, is you have to have awesome, more biased towards fast twitch and the kind of connective tissue arrangements and limb structures that allow high velocity, high force movements to be produced, right? Basically, the big one there is fiber type. If you have awesome fiber type, you're well on your way. Then you can ask, how is it optimal to train for good cardio with that fiber type? And the big realization is this: you want to train the system well without fucking the local musculature over, which means not a ton of long, slow distance stuff, but a lot of full system work, sparring, full body weightlifting type movements, calisthenics in which like frog jumps and so on and so forth, right? Full body movements and athletic movements, which are done with quality but relatively short time intervals or back to back to back, to get the systemic cardio up really, really high. So you have excellent blood volume, very well functioning lungs, properly hypertrophied heart, so on and so forth. Your muscles are not, you're not getting on a cycle ergometer and going for 5 hours to convert yourself to completely type 1 slow twitch muscles. You are still training in a relatively explosive way. Relatively is the big thing, but you're doing it with high volumes and relatively short rests, so that what ends up resulting is you conserve more. I don't want to say most, you conserve more of your fast twitch abilities than you would otherwise, but you're going through so much systemic stimulus to cardio that your systemic cardio isn't limiting you. And then the rest comes down to intelligence and how you move your body. For example, Kamaru Usman's very talented, but if he like did a bunch of jiu-jitsu with someone on the ground and just wrenched everything all the time, he would gas and cramp like you wouldn't fucking believe. Nigerians are unbelievable, but they also cramp like, what was that guy? He's also Nigerian. James, who's the super heavyweight in the UFC who knocks everyone out with like one touch?
Francis Ngannou.
Nagano is, same stock, right? Like unbelievable genetics. But the thing is, like, I'm pretty sure he can run like half a mile and then his quads just seize up on him and he dies. Like, that's how fast twitch he is. That's how crampy he is. How do you get around that is you really, really work on the systemic ability. You don't want to fuck with the local too much because it'll make them slower and less explosive. You don't want to kill the goose, the lazy golden egg. So fundamentally, that's kind of my answer is have great genetics, train with relatively high volumes and challenge the athletes in ways that they are genetically gifted for, more explosive, more fast twitch, more sport specific, but do plenty of them. And last one is lean. Stay lean, man. If you're lean, you can be unbelievably endurant without really doing a whole lot of cardio or nearly as much as you thought. Whereas if you have a lot of excess fat, it always really impresses me in a weird way how fat people can have amazing cardio because they're working at so much. Roy, what the fuck is his name, James?
Roy Nelson.
Roy Nelson is some kind of god's.
Dude,
I don't know what's happening.
He's terrible.
No, for sure. But like James, consider like how many 5-rounders he's had with that body. I mean, who else in the world could take that body? And I guarantee you, if John Jones had that body, he would quit after round 1. I'm just kidding. But like seriously, that is unbelievable. And so don't be that. Don't have to jump over those hurdles. Be as lean as you can be, and that's well on your way, James.
I work hard for my results, and I need my diet dialed in. The RP Diet app tells me what to eat to keep me on track and offers suggestions for changes based on my responses, giving me the freedom to choose my path. A personal digital diet coach for less than $15 a month? Yeah, that works.
Yeah, so, the obvious answer, as Mike already mentioned, is that he has fantastic genetics. And another thing that I think is worth noting that Mike already pointed out is that he probably doesn't train for hypertrophy at all. I would say maybe a little bit indirectly, but he doesn't go to the gym with the explicit intent of training for making himself more muscular. Let's just put it that way. Most of these guys don't, right? So here's the idea with guys like that in MMA training specifically. It tends to be kind of a one-directional relationship with the strength and the cardio type stuff, in that you can't take someone who has – let me rephrase. If you have somebody who has an incredible baseline of cardio, typically they don't get really strong and jacked, and you can still get them stronger, still make them more powerful, but it's just going to be an uphill, painful struggle. Whereas the other direction, if you have somebody who is already just genetically jacked or they've trained for a long time and they're jacked, you can make them significantly more conditioned. That is the one-sided relationship. So you can take somebody who already has a really, really big base of muscle mass and maybe is more type 2X characteristic in nature, and you can put them through the ringer on the cardio. They'll lose a little bit of pep in their step, but they'll still be way above anyone else at that point, right? That's kind of the idea with the Kamaru Usman. Even if he's doing dumb shit in training, maybe if he's even overemphasizing his cardiovascular characteristics, he has such a nice cushion in his genetics that even if he starts taking little performance decrements in his power and velocity, he's still going to have more than enough. And now he's taking that powerful muscle and just making it more endurant through training. And that is something that you can do reasonably, right? The reverse, however, is not true. You can't take someone who's essentially like a marathon runner build and make them hit as hard as a Kamaru Usman. It just doesn't go that. And he doesn't have to be him, but just hit as hard as somebody who is just naturally big and strong. It's just not going to work that way with training. Genetics plays such a big role. So the idea here is you have somebody with a lot of natural talent, or maybe they've worked really hard for it too, right? You can make that muscle more endurant. It's much harder to make the endurant muscle bigger and more powerful. It just doesn't work as well. So it's definitely doable, a combination of like high intensity intermittent stuff and developing a lot of work capacity. So like another mistake people will make with like MMA or something like that is they'll say like, oh, I got to just stick with like only explosive stuff, right? Well, it turns out you have to hold your hands up for 25 minutes in a championship fight. And you also have to be punching that whole time, right? So to say that like you only do it, like intermittent hit style cardio would also be a mistake, because I would argue that actually just holding your guard position, grappling, pummeling, throwing strikes is essentially continuous exercise, whether it's for 15 minutes or for 25 minutes, right? So there is some component of kind of what we would kind of call more continuous type training, whether it's it's always intermittent because you're moving around like this. But I think only doing intermittent HIIT style training for the sake of conserving your type 2 characteristics could potentially be a mistake. And you see it a lot with guys who get gassed, their arms come down, right? And then they start taking more hits to the head because they just can't hold their fucking arms up anymore because they haven't trained the muscles to be that endurant. So that's really kind of the gist of it. It's a very one-sided relationship in that regard. If you have somebody who's powerful, you can make them more endurant, right? And they'll maintain. And the thing is, like, even if you see, here's it, I'm rambling, I'm sorry. But even if you have somebody who has a significant like turnover of the intermediate fibers into a more type 1 characteristic, if you have them do a proper taper, right, they're actually going to actually revert a lot of that back to their kind of baseline state. They might lose a little bit from the training in the long-term sense, but in the short-term sense, do a taper, a lot of that goes back and your cardio stays up for a little while. So it's a pretty good trade-off. If you have someone who's powerful, you have them do some good cardio training, they'll maintain a lot of that power, and with a good tapering program, they won't have a whole lot of loss in pep in their step, and they'll be just as endurant. So the baseline thing here, though, is you're not Kamaru Usman. Don't worry about being Kamaru Usman.
Yeah. All right. Sean Morikawa Rubin. Actually, these are relatively straightforward because Sean's already got the right idea, so these will be super quick. Hey guys, hope you both have amazing holidays. Here's to a great new year. Number one, research says that sets of 5 to 10 likely produce similar growth systems of 20 to 30, but in RP plus hypertrophy stimuli video, Mike mentioned that due to fatigue, the fast twitch fibers might not be as fully activated during the last 5 reps of a 30 rep set as they might be fresh during a set of 5. If total overall muscle growth is similar between the high and lower rep ranges, but the fast twitch fibers aren't necessarily getting full growth from a set of 30 like they might in a set of 5, what's making up/filling up for all the equated growth in a set of 30? Is it just the slower intermediate twitch fibers growing a massive amount? I wouldn't say growing a massive amount, but growing much more, right? The slower intermediate fibers almost certainly need more volume total, more reps, more mechanical work to have the same relative increase in, I don't even say relative increase is true, the same relative as in same percent of their total ability to make gains. They just need more work, right? And concomitantly, faster fibers and very fast fibers need very little work and overreach very, very quickly. And you can see this working with very gifted athletes. Their MRVs suck, but you can't, there's no point in making them any higher because if you make them higher, they just convert to slower and intermediate twitch and then they have higher MRVs, but nothing gets accomplished or about the same gets accomplished. It's a road to nowhere. So is it just the slower intermediate fibers growing a massive amount? Not necessarily, but is it them growing more to make up for it? Yes, absolutely. Right? Imagine how much your slower fibers get stimulated in a set of 5. I mean, it's literally like for like, I don't know, 10 seconds or however long that takes. What about in a set of 30? Oh my God, it's like 6 times that amount, right? That fucking adds up. Then you throw in sets of 20 and sets of 15 and sets of so on and so forth. It turns out that, you know, there's a very likely a spectrum of how much fibers grow from how much the forces are and the durations of contraction. And then yes, the higher rep ranges very likely benefit the fibers that are not slow and intermediate, but slower than the fastest fibers. And that probably roughly evens out. That idea, for which there's quite a lot of support nowadays, is a huge problem for the effective reps concept, which is a great concept, but should really be rephrased like the proximity to failure concept or the hard sets concept. The effective reps and just counting them, big problem there is that unfortunately, you know, the mechanisms are not similar. The way the controversy started is people said, you know, your fast twitch fibers are used just as much in the last 5 reps of a set of 30 as they are the last 5 reps of a set of 5. And then a bunch of research, some of it older, that people just found, and some new research says that when lactate and other metabolite levels increase in the muscle as a whole, the faster fibers are the first to turn off. They suck. Their ability to clear metabolites blows. So they just seize up and don't do fucking hardly shit. So when you're saying like, yeah, man, the last set, no, you know, rep 25 through 30 and my high rep sets all fast twitch, or all, that's bullshit. It's just not, right? Those fibers are fucking gone by then. And actually, you're essentially prioritizing slower and intermediate fiber training in 2 ways by training for higher reps. One is you give them enough volume finally for them to get real robust growth because the rep number is higher. And 2, you're essentially like switching off the fast twitch fibers at the end, and the high fibers that have to pick all the slack are the slower fibers and intermediate fibers. So the answer is your suspicion is exactly correct.
Yeah, I got not much to add on that one.
Well, this one, he definitely just answered his own question on here. Super easy answer. Regarding the RP plus directed adaptation video where Mike said it's probably best for hypertrophy to stick to one exercise variant for a while and to not constantly switch exercises. How strict or lack thereof would technique on a given exercise have to be before it would be classified as too much variation? For example, I love elevated push-ups with handlebars I bring in my gym bag at my, that's actually a really great exercise. I really like it too.
Yeah,
at my old gym, there were lines on the floor and I'd literally line them up based on the lines every time. So I was performing the exact same motor pattern. But at my current gym, there's no line, so I kind of just guess, and I can even tell based off of feel every time. The push-ups feel different, both width and rotationally wise. Would this be too much variation in regards to direct adaptation? No, absolutely not. Or does the motor pattern have to be much more different for it to cross the novelty threshold? Right. So it's not really much of a threshold there. It's more or less just a spectrum. But I'll tell you this, like it should feel roughly the same week to week to week, roughly the same, and then you're good to go. Another thing you can do is like remember how you put them. Like an easy one is to reach your hands straight out in front of you and point them straight and be like, okay, this is straight, I do this, or this is straight, I move out thumb length, right? Or 3 inches or something. So don't just forget what you did last time and randomly put them down, but try to have roughly the same every time and you're totally fine. Another thing is set to set, even rep to rep on push-ups, you can make mini adjustments. Like if you do 2 reps and you're like, okay, this is way too wide, just bring them in a little bit and keep doing your reps. Or after a single set, be like, it was a little wide, that was a little narrow. Make the adjustments, and then your average push-up over the average number of sets is going to be exactly where you need to be. So I absolutely wouldn't sweat this whatsoever. Just don't be completely fucking insane and do some wacky shit and be like, oh, it's still a push-up.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like just some common examples of when you might consider it to be like enough variation. So taking your standard like kind of 45-degree technique push-up with the elbows and deliberately doing like a 90-degree push-up, right? That's like distinctly different. It's very similar, but different enough where the muscle activation is going to be different. Doing sets of like deficit push-ups like with the handlebars for like 10 to 20 versus doing like a standard no deficit push-up with the weighted vest for like 6 to 10 reps. That's a big difference, right? You've actually changed the range of motion and the load characteristics enough to jump at whole different rep range. That's enough change, right? Those are the things we're looking for. Like not necessarily like, is my hand like an inch this way or this, today. That's mostly kind of a wash over time.
Yeah. I would say that like folks, if you're looking for real practical advice, just super real world, no bullshit, a variation, James, correct me if I'm wrong, is a foot width or a hand width at least.
Yeah.
Like if you're doing 2 fingers here and 2 fingers, like, is it different? Sure, maybe. Is it different? We're going to check mark it different? No. So if you're off by a finger width here and there, it doesn't matter. But if you're like used to bench press like this and now you bench press like that, yeah, it's going to be a difference. So hand position and foot position, if it's a foot width or hand width apart, I think you're into meaningful variation.
And you can always use your like the Ghetto MEV indicators. Like if you're doing something that's like you're doing a different push-up variation and you're like, I don't know if I should treat this the same as the other one I was doing, use the Ghetto MEV indicators and say like, okay, how many sets did it actually take me to get like a little bit of a pump, right? If it only took you 3 sets and normally you had to do 6 sets, like that was plenty of variation. You did a great job on that switch.
Does it feel much different? Does it feel any different? Those are good. If you're like, man, this feels the same, well, motherfucker, it's the same. It's not. In this case, it's not rocket science, right? All right. Thank you too, as always. Well, you're welcome right back. James Mendenhall says, "Happy holidays. Would you ever periodize cardio from easier steady state to higher intensity intervals? I've been dabbling with some CrossFit and other activities that require some fitness, and mine is definitely lacking."
So for hypertrophy, I would say no, but for a variety of other sports, fuck yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
He says, I'm thinking that Dr. James' rugby days are relatively jacked and fit. Is there a sweet spot to making gains on multiple fronts? Unfortunately, the answer to that is absolutely not. By definition, there is no sweet spot. It's a spectrum. And then he said, also, would there be a benefit in using a heart rate monitor and doing some zone training, James? Hit it.
Yeah, so it depends on what you're going for, right? So in rugby, like rugby is inherent. Like I only bring up rugby because you brought it up, but like rugby is an inherently intermittent cardio type sport, right? Where it's like sprint, stop, sprint, stop, sprint. So it's an evil necessity to do that. It's not gonna. There's no sweet spot, like Mike said. There's only trade-offs, right? But usually what we would do is we would periodize, like you already alluded to, where you might have somebody doing more steady state cardio kind of in their off seasons or in their general preparatory periods, and eventually transitioning into more long intervals and then eventually high intensity intervals that are similar to whatever activity it is that you're doing. So for CrossFit, it might be might be a little bit more variable, but you could use kind of generalized interval training to enhance fitness for CrossFit as well. One of the times that we usually recommend doing that is kind of in your specific preparatory phases. And so what that would translate into this world is like whenever you kind of make a switch to more strength oriented training or more power oriented training, that's a good time to start switching over to interval training, because it's going to be a lot more similar to whatever sport you're doing, but also similar to the lifting that you're doing, where you're doing more high force, high power output type stuff. Whereas like the lower intensity stuff, you can kind of do it all the time if you want to, but probably the best time to do that is far away from competitions, just because it tends to bring you into that more slow twitch type state. In terms of using heart rate monitor stuff, you can. I think that the people who benefit from the heart rate monitor stuff the most are endurance athletes, right? I think for intermittent athletes, using like velocity zones, power zones, things like that are probably a better bang for your buck, because it's more indicative of what you're going to be doing on your competition. For CrossFit, I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if I have a strong opinion on that. I don't think a heart rate monitor is necessary. I think using the relative effort of whatever you're doing is probably just fine. But you could do it. I would say like a side benefit, but not necessary kind of thing.
Yeah.
Especially because like the intermittent stuff, it's hard to use the heart rate because it tends to like waver so much. So then you kind of have to look at like averages and stuff like that. And you have to chop the data to exclude like the warm up periods and the first kind of few intervals, because it's still climbing up. Eventually you'll get to like a steady state interval state where your heart rate's not really going much higher or lower than a certain spot. And you can kind of look at that, but it gets more tedious.
Yeah. Next question. Also, if over a few months some cardio gains do take place, can they be maintained with less volumes in a similar fashion to how you put on muscle groups on maintenance? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Getting in shape is way harder than being in shape.
So let me just like reiterate something that Chad always talks about strength as being a skill, right? In terms of like your ability to express your force in certain movements, like in powerlifting. The same applies here. So like your general cardiovascular fitness will remain intact as long as you hit like a pretty rudimentary maintenance volume. But that doesn't mean that you will be able to perform like HIIT training necessarily, right? Because you have to kind of be in that zone of training to really maintain something that's that specific. So what that means is you could, if you did like some HIIT, a couple blocks of HIIT training, you get really good at it. And that's awesome. If you transitioned out of that and then we're basically just hitting some maintenance volume runs, your intrinsic cardio would probably remain largely the same, but your ability to immediately switch back after taking a month or two off of doing HIIT and going back into HIIT, you're going to run into a first rough couple of weeks because a lot of the local factors have adjusted at that time. So just keep in mind, right? If you haven't low bar squatted for a long time, the first time you get back to low bar squatting fucking sucks. You need a few weeks to get kind of back into your groove. Same idea. The intrinsic ability of the muscle, and in this case, like your central systems, remains intact, but you have to be able to express it contextually, and that sometimes takes a little bit of time.
Yep. All right, hold on a sec. Boom. Actually, still same person, still James Mendenhall, with a question on protein intake. If 200 grams of protein a day is the goal, can 150 grams of it be from meat and assume the rest covered by the miscellaneous amounts in fruits, veggies, potato pasta, etc.? I have recently found a chickpea-based pasta that is actually really good.
God. I was at the store today and I saw the chickpea pasta and I looked at Mel. I was like, Jesus, this pasta is like all protein and fiber.
Yeah. 13 grams of protein per 2 ounces, and bagels in general tend to have 8 to 10. So depends on how technical you want to get. For most people, yes, that's absolutely fine. If you want to get real fine-tuned, then I would only count that protein as roughly half of its protein. Count the rest of it as carbs, essentially, because it doesn't convert to anything meaningful protein-wise in your body and just gets burned up for energy. So,
yeah, and it's hard to argue against like eating like fruits, grains, and veggies, and it's like those are things you should be eating. And I think for the average Joe, like you could probably just count that and just call it a day and not worry about it too much. But if you're a serious athlete, then maybe think about it a little more.
Yeah. All right, Adam says, I'm doing my first deload week at the moment, and I noticed there's a drop in volume and relative intensity, which is pretty standard for a deload, but there's also a massive drop in absolute intensity too. Some drop in all three is not unusual in a deload and depends on how the person programming wants to interpret or use the tools in a deload. But for example, last week I did deadlifts 200 kilograms for 10 reps at 3 RIR. This week it's 90 kilograms for 5 reps. That's like 35% of my 10 RM. For 5 reps. Personally, in a deload, I find if I reduce the absolute load too much, it affects strength in the following week. I'm wondering what the reasoning is behind this. Most of the weights are equal or less than the initial warm-up sets. So that in the first part of the week, your weights are going to be pretty heavy. In the last part of the week, they're going to be much lighter. I'll say that. And that says probably makes even less sense with the smaller muscle groups since fatigue is pretty low. Like a 50% rep and low drop in curls, is that necessary? So actually, it's not even necessary to deload. You can take an entire week off and get most of the benefits. The primary benefits you get from continuing to train is that very, very light, very low intensity training tends to run blood through the muscle, make it move around a little bit more, and probably enhance its healing and its adaptation so that it actually drops even more fatigue than if you took time off. Also, it keeps some of the motor patterns in check so that you're not like new as a bird to lifting when you come back. That being said, the heaviness of the weight with 1 week it absolutely does not affect the preparedness of the lifter in most cases. So if you took an entire week off of lifting, you almost always come back stronger and not weaker. Sometimes individuals who don't have very well established technique, especially with the heavy lifts, experience a strength drop because they get out of the mode of being able to do heavy technique, and they sort of just get unused to lifting heavy weights. That is not the same thing as losing an inherent capacity to be very strong. Also, in week 1 of your next muscle coming back, it's okay to be a little weaker because your shit catches up super, super fast. If you continue to lift very heavy during a deload, especially the connective tissue degradation and prevention of healing is so massive that it's going to be a strategy that lets you feel your swag a little bit more every meso and never really drop at all. But remember, you catch up everything, every one of that drop catches up no problem. And it's going to slowly but surely degrade your ability to recover connective tissue-wise, and eventually you're just going to be hurt. So we'd absolutely stand behind making deloads very, 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 very easy. And we make them so easy that we even have trouble defending why not just take a week off. If someone says, why not just take a week off? We have very good but very minor reasons for it. I'll put you this way much more simply. If someone said to us, listen, your deload reduces things by 35% on average, or to 35%. Would I be better off at doing 5%? I'm not going to do 35%. 5% deload, which means almost nothing. Or would I be better off doing 85%? I would say James and I, given that gun to the head choice of 5% versus 85, all volume, intensity, so on and so forth, and deload, we would choose 5 every single time. Because 85 is just going to not be a deload. It's just like, oh, here's shittier training that still keeps you fatigued. So, James?
Yeah, and not to mention that like 35% will conserve more fitness than 5%, but only by a margin at that point.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at this question, and I find it interesting that he used this example, and I think you'll see where I'm going with this, Mike, but he didn't mention any other lifts except for the deadlift. And I'm looking at this, and deadlift 200 kilograms times 10 reps at 3 RIR. Homie, that might just take 2 weeks to recover from, right? Yeah. You might be just like your first week back after the deload, you're still not quite right yet. So that is a if you're not noticing that exact same trend on your other lifts, I would say, first off, like that's a hardy lift, right? 10 reps to 200 kg at that level of relative intensity. That might be a 2-week recovery timeline on that one. And that might just be something you have to work out a little bit in your programming a little bit. If you saw everything going, like if you felt weak on everything in the weeks after your deload, and the week after your deload, I would be a little more suspicious. But since you used that example specifically, I'm kind of leaning towards like, you just might need a little more recovery time on the deadlift at that point.
Yeah. And Adam, some people need higher intensity to conserve adaptations, but those people are outnumbered by people who need less 9-to-1. So before you suspect you need to do a heavier deload, you can absolutely make it a little bit heavier. Play with lighter and see if a couple of mesos in you don't like it better.
Absolutely.
Magnus asks, in a structure of doing 3 mesocycles of massing followed by a mesocycle of cutting, followed by 3 mesocycles of massing, etc., where maintenance phases fit best? Are they needed after every phase ends or just after one of them? And what are the range of weeks in maintenance phases should ideally last? I'm thinking somewhere in the 3 to 5 weeks. Yep, 3 to 5 weeks sounds really good. Really even 2 to 4. And as far as where the maintenance phases fit in best, well, you probably need like no maintenance after the first one of these things. And after the second one, you've accumulated quite a bit of fatigue. You might need 2 to 4 weeks of maintenance. And then after the third one of these things, you might need 3 to 5 weeks of maintenance, with the last 2 of those being active rest, and then you could restart the cycle. If you want much more detail on that, our Mini-Cut manual book actually goes explicitly into what these ratios can be, and it outlines the theoretical basis of why they should be like that. So it's something good to pick up.
And then if you don't have enough justification on the physiological side of things, you can always look at the psychological side of things and just say, like, when do I need this break? I've been massing for fucking 3 mesos and I feel like dog shit. Am I going to go into a cut after this? Probably not. I'm going to take a maintenance meso and just relax for a little bit. That's a perfectly fine justification, and it doesn't interfere with anything that you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Connor Gann says, hey, docs, I just joined RP thanks to your YouTube webinars.
Awesome.
Super.
Welcome.
I love the content. You guys have truly transformed my way of thinking on fitness and bodybuilding. I love learning, so the lectures on gear are great. On gear.
It just goes right into that one.
Oops. Anyway, I had a few questions about it. I don't remember making any lectures on gear.
I was going to say, do we have lectures on that? Or maybe we're just,
who knows?
That word is just throwing us off. Maybe it meant something else.
Yeah. Anyway, I had a few questions about my current dieting situation. I'm currently doing a mini cut, and I'm James. Mini cut. Kind of the inside joke here at RP Plus is James, when we first published the mini cut manual, before we published the mini cut manual, we had 1 trillion mini cut questions. After we made a free article about mini cuts and made a YouTube video, people were like, mini cuts, and as everyone questions were about mini cuts. Then we published the mini cut manual, and I essentially answered 99% of all questions. But for like 2 weeks after we published it, we just got more questions about mini cuts. So James was like, are you serious? But then they really tapered off. And there's nothing wrong with mini cut questions. It's just really funny.
Just a good inside joke at this point now.
Yeah. I'm currently doing mini cut, and I've had great success, and I'm down about 2% per week and still feel great and hitting the weights I'm supposed to hit. I plan on going 5 weeks total. My volumes at my usual estimated MEV for massing may be slightly above. Great. And I'm using the same movements I used for 4 months mass prior. So if anyone sees issues, please let me know. Should I begin massing again immediately after the mini cut ends, or take a small maintenance to avoid any excess fat gain? I wouldn't worry about excess fat gain after this mini cut. So you can go right into massing, but if you feel like really, really fatigued and really beat up, you can take a week of extra week of deload or active rest and then start massing. It's totally fine. And he says, should I go through RIR all the way to 1 to 0 in a mini cut or stay towards 2 RIR? My thinking is there's no point to overreach in a month cycle since calories are really low and injury risk is high. I wouldn't say injury risk is very high. I think that your RIR, just by attempting to match your performance, you will get to 1 to 0 RIR.
Yeah.
It's like MRV comes to you instead of the other way around. So I think it's totally fine to get a 1 to 0 RIR, and as long as it's a good technique, no big deal. But if your mini cut comes to an end chronologically, like the 5 weeks are up, but you still haven't hit 1 or 0 and you're still at 2 RIR, fuck it, stop, and then you're good to go. So I think going to 1 to 0 RIR is probably still a fine idea for mini cutting. Because if you don't go to 2 RIR, if you go to 2 RIR the entire time, you might have to start taking weights off the bar and cutting off reps, which, you know, is an interesting pathway to go on because it essentially makes your MRV calculations obsolete, and then you don't really know how much training is good training. So I would still go all the way up to 1 or 0 RIR in that case.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm just kind of clinging on to this one sentence that he mentioned. I'm using the same movements that I used for my 4-month mass prior. I think for the mini cut, that's fine. But, 4 months of this, going on 5 months of the same movements, whatever you end up doing next, I think will be a definite time for some strategic variation. And maybe you're still getting a lot out of some of the movements that you're using, but I would say around that time is when I would maybe proactively start using some variation in those movements, especially if you end up switching to mass, then you can also reap the benefit of using the variation switch and then having a slightly lower MEV at the start. Some good reasons to do that, but other than that, seems good to me.
Yeah, super. Good catch, James. Stephanie Mills comes to us with a fucking massive problem. Hi, guys. I recently used an FFMI, Fat-Free Mass Index calculator, with inputs. 31-year-old female, 5'6", 158 pounds, 23% body fat, and came up with a gender-adjusted value of 24.2, which seems exceedingly high for my actual reality. Okay. I would say if you erred anywhere, it's on the percent body fat estimate, but that's where most people err. So if it seems exceedingly high for actual reality, that might be where to look. I don't think you missed your age and height. I've been training seriously for only about 4 years, 3+ years. Prior years, non-serious / shitty training. Gained 20 pounds total during this time, but I don't have a particularly great physique. Subjective judgment, irrelevant to FFMI, I'll have you note. And I don't put up impressive numbers, also irrelevant. Improvement is quite slow, but not Non-zero. Oh, sorry. Improvement is quite slow, but non-zero. I feel like I should have plenty of gains ahead of me, but if I knew for sure that I didn't, I'd probably switch to a more flexible and recreational style of lifting and spend more time on other sports or physical hobbies. How much stock should I put in this calculator? This first answer is not much, and you can look up Greg Nuckols has a great article about the FFMI. Just type in Greg Nuckols FFMI, and he takes about half a book length to shit all over that. And then I would train for another year and try your really best to put on more muscle. Get your sleep right, your training right, your diet right, and look back after the year and be like, how's it going? You might look back after another year and be like, God damn, like I've been fucking kicking ass. Like I'm way more jacked. This is great. And then you'll still do it after a year of really good trying. Now that you're, going to be 5 years into training, if the results are really, really underwhelming, as long as you're doing everything pretty well, then yeah, sure. It's quite optional for you to go and switch to other sports or physical hobbies. But I would definitely say the FFMI, the 24.2, I mean, is that high? Sure. How accurate is that? Who knows? Could you naturally achieve FFMIs of higher than 25? Absolutely. You might just be a genetic freak, right? And also, if you say you don't have a particularly great physique, the FFMI is telling you something that's literally the opposite, right? So it's tough to square those two. You might not think you have an impressive physique, but other people might think you have an impressive physique. And another thing you might be able to do is try to get leaner and see how you look, and then mass back up and see if you get much bigger and stronger. You might not be impressed with what you look like now, and you might be losing a passion for getting more jacked a little bit, but at 23% fat, look, you're female, right? Go down to 12 to 15. And you might be like, oh my fuck, I have abs, I'm ripped to shreds, look at my quads. Oh, but I want bigger quads. And then you'll have another 2 years of massing, and your quads will get that much bigger, and you'll be fucking in love with the whole process. So I think sometimes it's tough to, I think one of the reasons people do mini cuts and real cuts isn't even sometimes to put on more muscle, though that is a small side benefit. I think a lot of times it's for the soul. James, you know what I'm talking about? Like, you've been not lean for so long, you're kind of even know, I'm hypothetically adding muscle, but like, I don't know where the fuck I don't see any of it. And then you do a cut and you're like, oh, I'm fucking massive underneath all the shit. And it reinvigorates.
I grew a new vein in my shoulder. Where did that come from?
100%, 100%.
Yeah, totally. I think Mike and I, when people say like, I've been training hard and not getting great results, I think we tend to steel man people, maybe just because we came from strength conditioning background where people are used to working really hard. But unfortunately, and I'm going to sound like an asshole, but I think Mike knows where I'm going with this. It tends to be kind of the opposite, where people will say like, I'm training really hard, but the reality is that they're not training really hard. They just don't realize it yet. So what I would say is you might be having underwhelming results because you're training underwhelmingly, and don't take that as an insult. It just might be the reality. So I think what Mike said's really good. Train harder than you thought you could have ever trained for like a year and see what happens. Like if you don't see massive changes, like, tangible changes, either in terms of like how you subjectively look at yourself, or even you could do like body circumference measures and stuff like that, or you could use the FFMI again if you want. If you don't see it as a tangible thing to hang on to, then I love you answered the question yourself. Should I pursue other sports or physical hobbies? Yes, absolutely. There's no shame in that, especially if those things are fun and life enriching for you, and spending, 6 days in the gym for 2 hours at a time is not, and you fucking hate it, right? Like, who cares? Do what you love at that point and just have fun with it. There's no point in slaving away.
Yeah. Great stuff.
All right. I think that's it for our pre-canned questions.
Yep. And should I share the screen?
Yes, please. Let's see what funny things show up on your YouTube suggestions.
Oh, let me make sure I don't have any weird porn up. Share. Boom. Good.
Looking good.
Hey, look, it's Greg Doucette.
And Wim Hof.
Oh, sweet. Where? Oh, that's right. Dude, there was a period of like 6 months where everyone in jiu-jitsu asked me about Wim Hof. And I'm like, get the fuck out of my face. I didn't say that.
They were also like, don't you know Jim Hof? Like,
yeah,
God damn it.
The real Hof.
Let's see what else we got. We got, looks like GSP on Joe Rogan. I saw Lane Norton on there.
Thanks, algorithm.
Faraz Zahabi. We got some good stuff. Skinniest I've been in 20 years, the RP app. That was a good one.
Where is this?
Scroll down a little bit. There you go.
Oh, damn. That's what's up. That's fucking awesome.
Brandon Campbell Diamond.
Who the fuck is that? That's great.
He's got a check mark. He's legit.
It's awesome. That's fucking awesome. I don't have a fucking check mark. All right, so let's get some of these going. I saw a couple earlier. This is a funny one. I looked up what Eddie Hall looked like during his strongman days. Body goals, TBH.
Well, look at his profile pic there.
Yeah.
Omni Obstat.
Yeah, you got to be fatter, so keep eating.
Definitely strong man looking guy.
Yep. All right. Let us go to this one. I put this one up. This is very interesting. Hey, doctors. So this is by slower, weaker, and more stupid. Excellent training goals. Looks like a cat inside a burrito.
Cat in a tube or something?
Dear doctors, I've been physically inactive since I finished high school, starting strength training again at the age of 30. That was 2 years ago, December 2017 to be exact. Once I got in the habit of working out again, I was afraid to fall out of that habit and go back to my sedentary self, so I never took any days off ever. That was stupid.
Not great.
I was following Jeff Nippard's push-pull legs routine, doing heavy compound 6 days a week, and doing traps, neck, and abs on the weekend. Woo! Well, on one of the days, because 6 days a week does spill into the weekend. I recently went on a diet in which I went from 176 pounds to 164 pounds in a span of 2 months. I am a 5'11" man.
Okay.
Don't gender yourself. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, during the dieting phase, I started racking up all kinds of minor injuries. Welcome to dieting.
Welcome to training every day without.
Yes. Now I can't bench press or even do push-ups. It says now I can't bench press and do push-ups anymore without my AC joint hurting. I also developed nagging pain in my elbow and tingling sensation shooting down my lumbar spine all the way down to my left heel. That is to go see a doctor time. I will say that right now.
And it's like also immediate active rest time. You need to chill out a minute.
It hurts when I walk for too long. Recently I had some x-rays done to my spine, which revealed I have relatively narrowed L5, S1 disc space and straightened lumbar curve with subtle lumbar scoliotic list convex to the right. I have no idea what that means. It means the doctors couldn't find anything actually wrong with you. So you might be, there's potential that you could recover just by training more intelligently, not needing anything crazy like total time off or surgery or something like that. Real quick, before we get to the meat and potatoes of this question, I would like to illustrate something. You guys know James and I for long enough. We're obsessed with intellectual examples of major themes that really stand out. Here's one. This individual could have been commenting on YouTube about how he's training for 2 fucking years with no days off, and you don't fucking need days off, and he's never been hurt 2 months ago, and he would have been completely correct about himself. And then one tiny 8-week fucking diet breaks him into 50 fucking pieces. So before you ever take someone's, advice, my advice, James' advice as just, well, this is what I do and it works, you could be 1 fucking second away from total disaster because of what you were doing. So when bodybuilders say, well, I do this and it works for me, like, all right, and then tomorrow your fucking glenohumeral joint pops off and somebody tells you it's because of the way you've been doing stuff. You guys feel what I'm saying? So
oh yeah, respect
the process and don't put too much stock into, well, if it ain't, what is that term? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it ain't broke, you might be able to make it better so that it never fucking breaks. That would be awesome, right?
Yeah.
All right, but on to the, go ahead, James.
Nothing. I was just, there is some credence to that notion in some cases, but this is definitely not that case.
Yes, there's definitely credence to if it's been working, it's good, but don't think it's perfect and don't take yourself too fucking seriously because you could be doing everything wrong in spite of yourself and have no idea, right?
So I think that his next comment here kind of shed some light on why this is happening.
He says, continues on, I do have a history of addiction in my family and have been an addict myself in the past. And I think I might be addicted to working out if that's even a thing. It sure is a thing.
It's even listed in the DSM-4. It's an exercise dependency.
Yep. Have you ever dealt with something similar, workout addiction? I'm not even sure what kind of advice I'm looking for, but I just thought I would write it out and see if you guys have anything to say in regards.
Yeah. So you can definitely fall into addictive behavior tendencies with exercise. And I think I actually found myself in a similar spot a long time ago with that. And luckily I was able to set my mind right. But I think the reason why these kind of things just came full circle, right? Where you are worried about falling into old habits. You are getting like a very positive sensation with exercise, and it's enriching your life in many ways. So you don't want to let it go. But now you're running into the problem of I'm doing so much that I'm starting to rack up all these injuries, and I'm not really sure what to do, right? Well, the immediate answer of what to do is to see a doctor, of course. That's our blanket statement. But you need to take a little bit of time off, right? Probably at least a deload. I would say probably some active rest so that you can heal up some of these injuries and then get back to normal training. To say that like you haven't taken a day off in so many years really is an indicator that your fatigue management strategies are very, very poor, right? So if you were my client or somebody, if you were to ask me, I would say, knock that off. First of all, take at least one day off. Start thinking about how you can structure some fatigue management stuff like deloads, resensitization phases into your training. And that will go a long way in mitigating a lot of these little, I can't think of the word, these little injuries that you're getting over time. And these are just overuse injuries, right? That just come up as soon as like one thing goes wrong. As soon as you started that diet, you're a little more catabolic than normal, boom, all these injuries pop up. So that would be the first thing. And it's going to be difficult to step away, right? And so it might be good to seek out a specialist or a therapist that can help you do that, because when you back off of training, you're going to feel like, oh man, I'm going to fall back into the spiral. I feel shitty about it, right? So I would say it's going to be tough. Maybe seek out a therapist or somebody who can help you, but it's got to happen one way or another.
Yeah. An interesting sort of like way to get a little bit around some of that is you can have intentionally easier days so that you still get to go to the gym and still get to check mark the fact that you're training, but you don't spill your guts and use really easy exercises and use really submaximal training, so that you end up programming some easier training. You can do deloads like that too. Like you can literally go to the gym every day of a deload, but do such easy training that your body's like, we're healed, and then you won't run into these super problems. So a lot of times, Jared Feather used to be way more addicted to exercise than he is now, but he's trained so hard for so long, he's unaddicted, that he used to just not be able to take a day off. And he came to me once when I was still his professor, and he was like, dude, I honestly have a fucking problem. I can't take days off. And I was like, yeah, you should nut up and try it. But also, if you can't, you just go in and do real easy shit and then check mark the fact that you went to the gym. And for him, just going to the gym and getting some kind of movement going was such a huge psychological benefit that for a while he really did rely on that. And it saved, I guarantee you, maybe saved his career, you know?
Yeah. And at that point too, you might pick up another hobby, right? You might pick up like rec league soccer or something like that, where you can do something else, right? It doesn't have to always be going to the gym and spilling your guts.
Yeah. All right. Next person up is this guy. 1NV4L1D fucking incel. Incel.
Wait, is it like invalid name?
Oh yeah, you're right. I'm the incel.
I speak that internet.
You do, man. That's like 4chan Pepe the Frog language or whatever. All right. Thanks for the great content. I was wondering, really quick, now that we're on YouTube.
Now that we're on incels, is that
Chinley Dan once tried to explain to me, because he had a portal into these things. He's been on the dark side of the internet for sure. He tried to explain to me what the pro-Trump MAGA anime memes were. Remember the anime girls with like tanks and they were like pro-Trump? He really just tried his best to explain it to me, and I was just like, what ever-loving fuck are you talking about? It was like sort of Nazi-ish, like Japanese girls and tanks, like, oh my God, we love Trump. And I was like, what the fuck does that have to do with anything? And these people would post these as replies to like intellectual arguments for or against Trump. And I was just like, jack off more. Stop looking at girls and tanks, jack off to them, you get over them, and you're going to get onto policy. Fuck.
Virtually all of the alt-right memes just go like right over my head. I don't get, I didn't get Pepe the Frog. I don't get the tank girls.
You ready for this one? Alt-left memes don't go anywhere because they don't make any, because they're not funny people, because they're lifeless assholes.
Yeah. They're too busy.
No sense of humor makes jokes hard.
Too busy with their call-out bullshit.
100%. All right, anyway. Sorry, invalid username. Let's get your excellent question going. Thanks for the great content, you bet. I was wondering, during back training, is it worth to use wrist straps on movements such as pull-ups bent rows, lat pull downs, etc. I've never used them before. My theory is that it might improve the mind muscle connection a bit, maybe. Besides, the point of back movements is to target the back, so forearms, grips are limiting factor. Aha! Hindering you from getting 1 to 2 reps or more. Back training would improve by using wrist straps. Thoughts on the matter? If any of you use wrist straps, do your recommendations look like VersaGrips Cobra is popular? So, yes.
Fuck yeah, dude. Yeah.
Yes. James and I have tons of clients. I don't train clients anymore much. James still does. We don't recommend straps unless they need them. So if they say, look, I think my grip is giving out before any of this stuff happens, for sure straps. But like for a lot of folks, especially, like older women and stuff, their grip strength is actually stronger than the compound strength a lot of times. So it's really not an issue, right? But for a lot of people, especially as your back and various other muscle groups get really strong, then your grip starts to be a limiting factor. And then straps are huge, huge, huge. I'm so fucking lame. I use straps on pull downs. But I can get 8
Way
to 10
more
more reps on fucking pull downs, man. Like, it's not even like whatever RIR I think I have if I'm training without straps just doesn't exist. It's
not to mention like on the subsequent sets. That's where like the big benefit is, right? It's like you can get more on the first set for sure, but it's like usually the second and third sets. And now that your grip
forearms are like, fuck that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So straps are great, and you know when you need them when your forearms start to give out before your back does. And VersaGrips are the god king of wrist straps. They're the best in the fucking world. If you buy a pair of VersaGrips, I would just go Pro. I think they're like $5 more. VersaGrips Pro, get the right size. You're going to feel connected to the bar in a way you never thought was possible. Folks, I'm not paid by VersaGrips to say this. I actually approached them. I was like, I have a big Instagram following. Do you guys want to I won't take any money. I just want to blast you guys. And they're like, we don't do sponsors. And I was like, well, okay, I feel sad, but I walked off. This is
Dr. Mike, try our new product, VersaCock. Wrap it around your wiener and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. One guy was like, what you'd really love is to go fuck yourself and get out of here. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, these guys, damn shit. But I was still fangirling because, damn, VersaGrips are the shit. Try them.
And one other thing on the strap, and this is, we're saying the same thing at this point, but one thing you can, with the back training in particular, I think it does improve my muscle connection. And especially like I've noticed this came up either last time we did a webinar, or maybe the time before when the like chins to chest came up. For me, that's something that just doesn't happen without straps, right? That just will not happen. So it allows me to execute a technique, which is slightly harder, which is generally better for the training. So I think it's a really good move.
Yeah. Dude, I don't know why I'm getting recommendations from these fucking weird YouTube channels of like, I ate everything I wanted for a week, and then we tried the carnivore diet for 30 days, and then like all these fucking other videos of like, we tried vegan for 30 days. Like, get fucked. Sorry, I'm sure Buff Dudes is a fine channel, but
Buff Dudes.
Try some shit for.
It's the same as like with your like on your news feed on your phone. Like it'll be like you're like, I'm kind of interested in fitness, but I don't want fitness spam, and it'll be like, these 3 things improve your bench press, and you're like, I don't want to see these things.
Yeah.
But like I am interested in fitness, but
I'll
too much fitness.
Hey, look, this guy made a video in his kitchen about Greg Doucette and Dr. Mike debate, and his topic there is quit being so damn sensitive. But the reason he made it was because he thought I bullied old Greg on there and made him look stupid. So I just think that's really funny.
Chase Irons.
Yeah. He said a lot of things that also made no sense. But that's neither here nor there, Mr. Irons. But thank you for the video. All right. Where was he? Okay. Chris Bickley says, once again, I love the content you guys and gals at RP provide. How do you feel about...
There are no gals at RP.
We don't... How do you feel about slow eccentrics? 3 to 4 seconds, if that's the trainer's preferred method of training. I have recently started doing 3 to 4 second eccentrics with a 1 second concentric. It has really helped dial in form and get a mind-muscle connection. So it's actually really good for those 2 specific things. I love this way. And it's also good for one more thing, just variation, but we'll get to that in a sec. I love this way of training, but was wondering if I should in time speed up the eccentrics to get the full benefits. Obviously not lifting as much weight, but feeling the muscle working a lot more, less weight and slowing down. Thanks. So assuming you're going for hypertrophy and not strength, for sure, you should speed up your eccentrics. For hypertrophy, up to 3-ish, maybe even a little longer eccentrics is totally fine and roughly is same hypertrophy. And if it helps you get a better mind-muscle connection And if it helps you really dial in your technique, that means you might experience less chronic injury and wear and tear with the same hypertrophy. So it's really, really good. It's not mandatory because not everyone, and some exercises you just don't get the same thing out of a slow eccentric. Like, pull downs, like it can do a fast eccentric and feel everything just fine. Pull downs are mostly about the concentric anyway, right? But like squats, you might have a real big benefit, leg press, so on and so forth. What I would say is don't take it much beyond 4-second eccentric, because then you're taking so much weight off the bar and you're tiring out some of the other structures just staying erect for that long. You got it, erect. That it ends up being that other things are limiting. One thing you might notice, so for example, like if you do really, really slow eccentrics for like biceps or something, like 6-second eccentrics, you start getting cardiovascularly tired after a while. And your supporting musculature just has to stand there for so goddamn long that it might be like, that's not even what's going, or your biceps might be fine, your grip might start to go, or your lower back, just overall fatigue just goes up systemically until you're like, why the fuck am I still curling? Right? But if you do relatively more rapid curls, you get hit the muscle hard without everything else fatiguing. So that's some of the stuff you should really look up. Perfect example of that, actually, fuck curl squats. I mean, James, imagine doing sets of 15 with 5-second eccentric in a squat. Like, I mean, I don't even know, like, that trains the quads, sure, but it just trains your back, lower back muscles to get tired.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I would say don't push it much further than 3 or 4, but within the range of, a 1 to 2 second to a 3 to 4 second eccentric, it's all good. And if now and again you want to just vary things by speeding the eccentric up, that's totally fine. But I think if you train for the 3-second eccentric for the rest of your career, I almost certainly wouldn't cost you anything.
I'm going to sound like an asshole again, but this isn't meant to be accusatory either, but I think some people will often do stuff like that to avoid lifting heavy, right? And I think if you're doing it for that reason, that's probably not great. I think if you're doing it for the purposes of improving your technique, improving your mind-muscle connection, that's all gravy. I still think that it's probably not a bad idea to lift heavy at least sometime throughout the year. And so if you are deliberately avoiding that by saying, like, I'm going to do bench press today, but I'm going to do like my slow eccentric so I don't have to put, so I can stay at 185 instead of going to 245, I'd say you might consider not doing that all the time and making sure you're still getting some heavy stuff in every now and then.
Yeah. And that's really another one of those, looking for quality instead of arbitrary quantity is if your slower eccentrics really fuck up your muscle target, awesome.
Yeah.
If you're like, man, I know I should be doing more weight, but
but I don't want to because I'm feeling lazy, right? Like,
yeah, then that's not a good reason. And we've all been there. I've been there for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's nothing like you would. How many times do you go load up like 5 plates on the leg press and you're like, I am so fucking stoked to do this right now, right? You're like, no, I would much rather do 3 and take the slow eccentrics and finish without being like totally crippled. Absolutely. But sometimes you got to get crippled. That's just how it goes. Not in the literal sense, but you got to just put in some hard work and it's going to suck.
Yep. Some things are, and it's interesting. Like we always talk about the stimulus to fatigue ratio and perception of like how much tension you experience in the muscle versus connective tissues and other structures. I think that stuff can be taken too far where you get away from the exercises that just royally fuck you up for great benefit. Like somebody like, oh, I never feel like quads on squats, so I just do only extensions. You're like, man, yeah. I feel like your squats just suck. And if you did them properly, you'd feel your muscles and the rest of you. And it's okay to feel the rest of you as long as your muscles are getting a really good hit too. So don't take that stuff of like, well, if I can't feel the muscle properly, it's useless. Don't take it too far. There's got to be a balance of that and a relatively hardcore compound movements in which you might not feel a whole lot of anything, but they do help make you stronger, make you grow.
Sorry, on that note, I was just thinking of like stiff-legged deadlifts is a great example of one where you might not want to do that, right? It's going to fuck you up really bad. And the reality is you might actually get more out of it if you were using some heavier weight, right? So now you're getting fucked up just from needlessly extending out the rep duration. Like now you can't sit for 2 weeks on end. Whereas if you just went up like 20 pounds, you would have got a great stimulus because your hamstrings are really tight, fast twitch type muscle group, and they benefit from lifting either really explosively or really heavy weights. Same height. So that's kind of the idea there.
Yeah.
All right.
Boom. That's it, man.
All right. Well, guys, sorry we were gone for a little bit, but I hope you can appreciate that we had the holiday downtime. I hope you guys all had a wonderful holiday season. And real quick, let's just do a quick housekeeping. I think what Mike and I have been talking for a little bit, and I think we're going to do a slight format change in that we're going to do a weekly webinar from now on, but I think we're going to get away from doing the actual dedicated live time because basically only one person usually at most will come and do the live timing. And Mike and I have just had like a really crazy travel schedule for the last, for like the last 3 years, but this last year in particular was kind of crazy. So I think the goal we're going to shoot for is just to do at least one weekly webinar per week, maybe not at a scheduled time, but we'll put it out just like we always do, and hopefully just get one per week. So I think that's the change we're going to make going forward.
Yep. Real quick, sorry. Last commentator here. I'm not even going to screen share it because it would just take too long. Jackson, Jaxon from last week. Jackson Karnowski.
Xmas Jackson Flaxman Waxon.
Yep. It says, damn, Dr. Noik dissed me, LOL. I'm half black with a Polish last name. I never had a chance of having a normal name. Dude, welcome to my club of never having a chance to have a normal name. All good. We love you. And anytime we make fun of you, it's because we got none but love for you.
Yeah, if anything, we love the hilarious names. That's why we make fun of them.
People with regular names suck. I don't want you Matt Johnson or some shit. Get out of here.
James Mendenhall. Yeah, I'm calling you out.
Please. In jiu-jitsu, when you slap hands, you introduce yourself to new people at the gym. And half the time when I'm like, Mike, they're like, okay, Matt. And I'm like, yeah, sure. You know, like whatever. White guy name. Who cares? Matt, Mike, Paul, Ryan.
Bill. All right, we're going to wrap this one up for this week. Thanks for all of you who follow us on RP Plus. If you are watching on YouTube and you want to get your questions answered, please feel free to subscribe to RP Plus, and we will cover you, my man. We got you.
Peace.